Welcome to our first daily roundup from the Energy Intelligence Forum. I'm Ronan Kavanagh, Deputy Editor of VI New Energy, and I'm delighted to be joined by three of our moderators from today's session. From Dubai, Oliver Klaus, our Bureau Chief out there. From Phoenix, Arizona, Casey Merriman, Editorial Director for the Western Hemisphere and Head of Competitor Intelligence. And here in London, the President of Energy Intelligence, Alex Schindler. Alex, I'll come to you first. This has been a very difficult year for us and the industry, with the pandemic forcing us to use a digital platform rather than having a physical event. It seemed to go well today, didn't you think?
Hi, Ronan. Yep, thank you for hosting this session. Yeah, I think as everyone knows, the hosting a digital event was not our first choice for 2020. We had intended to host this event live here in London, as we normally have done for the last 40 years. This was going to be our reinvention of the Oil and Money event into the Energy Intelligence Forum. And we had done a lot of work for that to kind of prepare the way. But of course, the pandemic waits for nobody, and it's forced everybody to change their responses. So we've worked very hard to find a way to get us into a digital format here. We did some explorations about how this can work. And you said it went very well. I agree. But I have to admit, having 40 plus speakers spread across the world from Japan to California, all on their own home internet connections, potentially gave us a fair amount of concern going into this. But we've seen actually it's been run very smoothly, and I guess it's a great testament to people's internet connections that they've been able to hold up. So I think well done, for our side. I'm quite happy how it turned out.
Great. And part of today's event was the award of the Energy Executive of the Year Award, which went to Amin Nasser, the President and CEO of Saudi Aramco. He joined you then for a leadership dialogue, didn't he? And you had a lot to talk about. It's been a very eventful year for Aramco.
Yeah, indeed. I think, we've had a few sessions with Amin over the last couple of weeks. And, I think part of this is from my perspective, what I'm interested in with Aramco is how they're responding to the pressures on the energy transition, which if we didn't have COVID, the whole conference would be about the energy transition. And each year we've seen the conversation get more and more about what this transition means. And today, almost every panel, you could sense the seriousness of it and the seriousness of the debate. So for me, it was interesting to kind of figure out how Aramco is preparing themselves for the eventualities here. What do they see that's coming, and how are they transforming the company? And I think the most important thing that we've learned from them is what we've heard from Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman today, the Minister of Energy from Saudi Arabia, talking very specifically about an energy company. And it's easy to miss this as just, well, they're just looking to become an energy company. But it's the energy component of what they're trying to do, which is quite important. Going into other areas beyond just simply producing barrels of oil, going into products that are non-combustible, for example, going into areas like hydrogen, looking into places like crude to chemicals, which I've been trying to prove up for a while. When we talked about in our discussion about CCS, trying to see how quickly that sort of technology can get proved up. Now, these technologies seem to be, at least in Aramco's case, quite a bit of ways off. It's not tomorrow it's going to be commercial. But Aramco has this kind of financial power to actually be able to deliver some of these things. So it's important to listen to what Aramco is saying, what the technology is pursuing, because that's going to be something that can get some cash behind it, because their shareholders, i.e. the government, is looking to make these things work.
Very interesting. Thank you, Alex. Now, Casey, you were in a leadership dialogue with Mike Wirth, the CEO of Chevron. And as you said, the sector is seeing a soul-shaking downturn. Has his view on demand changed?
I would say yes and no. Certainly the short term is unlike anything anyone could have expected, right? And so certainly this will take a while to get to the other side of. But I think what did strike me from Mike's comments was that, yes, they believe that oil will have a long-term place in the energy mix. He noted that historically, other sources of energy grow as overall energy consumption grows, but they don't necessarily enter systemic decline. But his kind of emphasis on all of the above, I think, is demonstrated in some of the other bits we heard about Chevron's strategy. They really are, yes, they're the most oil-weighted major, but they're making a lot of moves in a lot of different areas.
Interesting. And you discussed the potential for consolidation in the industry. What did he have to say there?
Yeah, he just pointed that, people think big oil, and there are massive oil companies globally that obviously comprise a large share of the market, but it's a heavily fragmented industry. And that reality means that there are a lot of inefficiencies. There's a lot of overhead. There are a lot of things that add layers of costs and can damage returns, right? It adds competition for services and things of that sort. And so he is very much of the view that, the industry needs to get smaller so that it can not just kind of survive, but thrive, because, even if oil has a bright future, it will be a challenged future. And so it has to become more effective.
Indeed. And looking at the energy transition, Chevron sees a strong role for gas, doesn't it? And it's taking steps here.
Yeah, that really was one of the most striking things I took away from it, is that, as I said, Chevron is more oil weighted, but I heard gas, watch this space kind of thing. The East Mediterranean moves that they've made with their acquisition of Noble and just independently building up a position in Egypt. They want to play regional markets. He said that they are interested in the Qatar LNG expansion, for instance, and are actively participating in that. So, they definitely are going to move more into gas than perhaps we would have maybe expected a couple of years ago.
Interesting. And he also talked, didn't he, about the need for the industry to strike the balance between returns and environmental performance. Can you explain a bit more?
Yeah, it really kind of hits on this idea of that the industry has to really think about stakeholders, and shareholders are one of those stakeholders, right? So what the industry needs to do is it needs to find a way to invest lower carbon and improve on its honestly pretty pitiful returns performance over the past decade, and is trying to find ways to do that. And so one of the things that's really interesting about what Chevron has done this year is it has really stepped up in some commercially viable low carbon investments because it sees them as market ready. And so it really kind of speaks to this idea that while they may not be taking on the net zero ambitions of the European majors, they're not sitting still.
Thank you, Casey. Now, Oliver, in another dialogue, you were speaking with the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas and Steel for the Government of India. He had a lot to say about the pandemic, didn't he, and its impacts?
Yeah, thank you, Ronan, first of all. I thought it was a great first day. Just wanted to get that out there. He did talk about, Minister Pradhan, he did talk extensively about the pandemic, the impact it has had on the country, on the energy sector. Obviously, India was hit really hard by the pandemic. It continues to struggle with the fallout, but he did say that consumption in sectors like industrial, power, transportation, you do see an upside, and they're all nearing pre-COVID levels. With aviation really, being the one that's pretty much lagging behind, just like, elsewhere in the world. But his view pretty much was things are at least moving into the right direction. Demand could reach pre-COVID levels, maybe in the first quarter of 2021. That's the last quarter of the Indian financial year. But he was also clear that, there's a lot of uncertainty still out there. It's obviously impossible to predict how the pandemic will play out from here. But, I'd probably say he was cautiously optimistic.
Very good. And he talked about, beyond the current situation, that India, of course, remains a strong growth market.
Yeah, definitely. he did highlight the role, the important role oil and gas will continue to play in India's economy. And, he specifically highlighted domestic transportation and power generation as sort of key drivers, behind that. One thing he mentioned was that India will need to add about, 50%, roughly a little less of refining capacity by 2030 to meet domestic demand. So that's quite substantial. It tells you, the direction things are headed. He also spoke about the gas side specifically. He stressed that investment plans, they're planning to invest some $60 billion in the gas sector. The projects are going ahead. So he was quite specific on projects that are in the pipeline. These are projects under implementation, and that's pretty much everything from LNG receiving terminals to expanding the domestic pipeline network and so on. So there's some delays, COVID-related delays, but this is going ahead. And, and I think one point he made that was, important in the context was that, he spoke about the ambitions of India as a developing society and, the government's effort in ensuring that all citizens will have access to energy. And so these are some of the, the key drivers behind this.
Thank you, Oliver. I think for everybody, there was a lot of very thought-provoking material today. And tomorrow, again, we have a lot on the agenda. We have politics, panels on geopolitics, the energy transition, natural gas, the US election, and upstream. And Alex, too, there are more leadership dialogues, aren't there? You're starting the day with one. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tomorrow morning, we're going to start off with the CEO of ADNOC, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber. We'll have a leadership dialogue with him. So that'll be a good way to start off the day. And we've got two big interviews with the CEOs of the big European oil companies, Total and Shell, coming up. And as you say, the US is going to be a major focus tomorrow. It's on everybody's mind. We talked about it a bit today, but tomorrow we're going to see a lot more or hear a lot more about the US. We got the CEOs of two big US companies, the CEO of Oxy and CEO of Tellurium, that are going to be speaking as well, plus a very special presentation from a former presidential candidate for president who will give a very thought-provoking discussion about what he thinks is going to happen in the election. But I wanted to go back to one thing, from day one that sort of came up. I think for me, there was like two, really interesting sessions that were and they were the bookends of the day. It was Oliver's session that started off with the Indian minister, and then it was the session we saw on finance at the end of the day. And that basically, showed the tension between what's happening here, because as Oliver says, India basically laid out, look, oil and gas demand are not going anywhere in India. They're not laying out sort of these net zero goals. They're saying, look, it's required that we're going to need all these resources. And then you fast forward to the end of the day in the finance panel, and we just heard there was this sort of basically catch-22, where investors not investing in short cycle, because they got burned, and nobody's going to invest in projects that are going to be 20 years down the road. Or as Bob McGuire, the moderator, said, 100 years in the future. That's over. So, there is a tension there between the requirement of the energy that's needed for these economies and the actual money that's going to be behind them. That doesn't mean we're going to have a supply crunch, but it means something's going to have to give in that sort of very difficult situation that we're seeing right now.
Interesting, and certainly a lot to watch out for tomorrow. And also, again, on Thursday, we have more for you. Details you can find on our website, www.energyintelligenceforum.com. So I'd like to say thank you, Alex, Casey, and Oliver, for sharing those insights with us. And thank you too for our viewers for staying late with us for this wrap. We hope you'll join us again for tomorrow's roundup. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.